hear the name Frank Lloyd Wright, chances are iconic buildings like Taliesin, Falling Water, or the Guggenheim come to mind. Along with Johnson Wax and a dozen others, these should be considered Wright's greatest hits. The only problem with greatest hits is that they get repackaged over and over and over and over, which is fine, but nobody really wants to listen to an infinite loop of the Beatles singing "She Loves You, Yeah, Yeah, Yeah." No, they don't. Especially when there are deeper tracks like "Here Comes the Sun" or "Blackbird" to round out that astounding playlist. Like the B-side of Beatle hits, Wright's catalog is chock full of hidden treasures and rarities. They may not have had the best budgets or the most dramatic locations, but they are profound creations, each in their own way. And Wright certainly didn't reserve his best ideas for his richest clients. Much like his greatest hits, the recounting of Wright's personal life has been copy-pasted into hundreds of books. But to truly understand the man, not just the caricature, he must be seen through the lens of his smaller works and through the eyes of the clients he built for. So I'm qualified to talk to you about one small house that fell off the charts. It's the Malcolm and Nancy Willey House in Minneapolis. After studying it for almost 20 years, I'm still surprised by what it has to teach us about Wright, the man and the architecture. In 1932, Nancy Willey read an autobiography, and in her youthful exuberance, sent a letter to Wright asking for a house. After getting him all frothed up about her desires for a small home with a lavish description of the site, she demurely ended her letter saying she wouldn't expect him to take on anything so trivial. Wright's provocative response to Nancy's request was, "Nothing is trivial because it is not big," and eventually he proved it, though initially he had no idea that Nancy wasn't well off, and she had no idea that Wright himself had been out of work for years. He went on to design a large house for her, which was beyond her means. After a year of trying to make it work, she challenged back, "I want an $8,000 to $10,000 house for $8,000 to $10,000. Can I have that?" Wright eventually agreed, saying, "We'll redesign. It's the only way." In December of 1933, Wright redesigned her house. Other than the 5-foot planning module and the focus on the southern horizon she had requested, there were no similarities between the two schemes. Nancy's pushback boosted Wright over the hump of designing for an entirely new generation, and this second house fit the Willeys like a glove. What Wright devised was a single-story inline plan with a huge masonry wall to the north and an open facade of French doors exposing the interior of the house to the southern horizon. A brick wall extending from the bedroom wing created an L to enclose a private garden. With Scheme 2 came significant advances. On one hand, we have the basis for Wright's Usonian homes. On the other, we have a major influence on what was to become, in plan, the American ranch house. So in simplifying a solution for the Willeys, Wright inadvertently drew a template for a housing type that would suit generations to come. A byproduct of this new servantless house was the open plan kitchen. The idea was absolutely revolutionary in 1934. It was here that Wright renamed the kitchen the workspace to help eliminate the stigma of servitude. This was the very first house where Wright's clients would live equally in every room, and so every room must offer both beauty and utility in equal measure. Nancy Willey was exactly the right client for the time. It's unlikely that Malcolm and Nancy's small commission would have appealed to Wright had he been busy with San Marcos in the desert, but the Great Depression reset his architectural ambitions as well as his definition of a client. But building with Wright required sacrifices. Because Nancy supervised construction, she had to overcome being a woman in a man's world, then deal with shortages and price fluctuations brought on by the Depression, and after breaking ground, navigate a truckers' strike that cut off deliveries to the job site. Finally, Nancy had to cope with a neighbor who perceived the rising masonry a threat to the neighborhood, calling it a spite wall. Though Nancy had acquired proper variances, the house was nearly derailed by this irate neighbor who didn't understand why Nancy wouldn't want a house just exactly like everyone else's, but she persevered. The Willey House was the first real hands-on architecture for the Taliesin Fellowship. By Scheme 2, all the professional draftsmen had left Taliesin. An actual paying commission inspired one apprentice to post on a bulletin board, "Lo, on the horizon, a customer appeareth. By God, he shall not perish on this earth." An elegant shelter alone would never be enough for Wright. Beyond the economies of a simplified plan lay complex geometry that locks the house to its site and to the landscape. Diagonals in the living room match the line of the diagonal terrace, which match the diagonal lot, and so on. Here we have a rectilinear house that is in no way a box. The space inside the house is remarkable in the way it diminishes any sense of boxiness, but also how it unites living spaces with the natural world. Three stacked planes penetrate the structure. They create interior continuity, and at the same time, they flow from inside to outside and back again. The depth and complexity of Wright's design for the Willeys defies any simple description. The takeaway is this: never underestimate a Wright House, no matter how small or obscure. If you're fortunate enough to own one, think twice before making changes to it. Chances are excellent that there's far more to the design than you can imagine. When it comes to Frank Lloyd Wright and his architecture, always assume nothing is trivial. Thank you.
Amazing work.
Thank you.